Namaste and good morning to all of you. Let's start the class with some mantras. Om Parthaye Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayan Swayam Vyasen Gratitam Puran Munina Maha Madhye Mahabharatam Advait Amritvarshini Bhagavati Mashtadashadhyayani Am Tvam Anusandhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshine नमोस्तु ते व्यास विशाल बुद्धे फुल अरविंद आयत पत्र नेत्र येन तव्या भारत तैल पूर्णः प्रज्वलितो ज्ञानमया प्रदीपः प्रपन्न पारिजाताय तोत्र वेत्र एकपानये ज्ञान मुद्राय कृष्णाय गीता अमृत दुहे नमः सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोगदा गोपाल नंदना पार्थो वत्सा सुधीर भोगता दुग्धम गीता अमृतम महत वसुदेव सुतम देवम कंस चानूरमर्दनम देवकी परमानंदम कृष्णम वंदे जगद्गुरुम भीष्म द्रोण तटा जयद्रथ जला गांधार नीलोत्पला शल्य ग्राहवती कृपेन वहनी कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थाम विकर्ण घोर मकरा दुर्योधन अवर्तने सो तीर्णा खलु पांडवै रणनदी के वर्तका केशवा पाराशरे वत्सरोजमलं गीता अर्कंधोटकम नानाख्यानक केसरम हरिकथा संबोधन अबोधितम लोके सज्जन शत पदय पदय पे पिये मानम मुदा भूयाद भारत पंकजम कलिमल प्रध्वंसी न श्रेयसे मूकं करोति वाचालं पंगुम लंघ्यते गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे परमानंद माधवम यं ब्रह्म वरुण इंद्र रुद्र मरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्यस्तवे वेदै साङ्गपद क्रमोपनिषदै गायन्ति यम सामगा ध्यानवस्थित गतेन मनसः पश्यन्ति यम योगिनो यस्यन्तं न विदुषुर असुरगणा देवाय तस्मै नमः. We are on chapter 5 of Bhagavad Gita. And the title of this chapter is Karma Sannyas Yoga. We ended our last week's class with verse number 15. Na adate kasya chit papam na cha eva sukritam vibhu agyanen avritam jnanam ten muhyanti jantva. The Lord, Vibhu, Bhagwan, takes neither the demerit nor the merit of any papa or punya. Knowledge is enveloped by ignorance, thereby beings are deluded. Okay? This knowledge. He talks about knowledge quite a bit. The Gyan. So what the Gyan is that God provides the soul the power which soul gives it to the Prakriti. So power is given by God because Atma is nothing but Ansha of Paramatma. So power is there. But once the Prakriti, or we have performed the actions with the power supplied by the Lord, results come to us according to the law which he has put on. This law is a very fixed law. As you sow, so shall you reap. That is the law. Okay? So he doesn't interfere in there. But in ignorance, some people do not even realize that they possess the freedom to choose their actions. And they just hold responsible who? The God for their mistakes. Or some people, they just harbor the pride of doership in the egoistic notion of being the body. And all of this is ignorance, according to the Gita philosophy. That's why in the next verse now, Lord Krishna is explaining how this ignorance can be dispelled. So if ignorance is the cause for our suffering, ignorance is the cause of not knowing the reality, then how can we dispel this ignorance? Because that's what we need to do. And the relationship between the knowledge and ignorance, again and again, Lord Krishna explained beautifully. He says, ignorance cannot be knowledge, nor can knowledge be a part of ignorance. Okay? It's only veiled. And we got to unveil this truth. The unveiling of truth is a process of the removal of ignorance, not the creation of the knowledge. Knowledge is already there. We are not creating knowledge. It's only an act of discovering, not a creative achievement. Okay? So we'll understand this in our next verse with the example which he is giving it to us, which all of us are familiar with. Jnanena tu tat ajnanam yesham nashitam atmanah tesham adityavat jnanam prakashyati tat param. Jnanena, by wisdom, by divine knowledge. Tu means but, tat is that, ajnanam, ignorance, yesham, whose, nashitam is destroyed, atmana, of the self, tesham, there, adityavat, like the sun, jnanam, knowledge, prakashyati, illumines or reveals. That means that, param, the supreme, the highest. So tat param together means that highest supreme entity, tat param. But to those whose ignorance is destroyed, how? By the knowledge of the self. Like the sun, to them knowledge reveals the supreme. So a man of realization is one in whom knowledge has lifted this veil of ignorance. And this knowledge comes not by degrees, but instantaneously. You just remove the covering, knowledge is already there. It's almost with a lightning flash. Ignorance ends. And with the end, end of the ignorance, what really ends? The ego ends. Wrong identification with ourself ends. And that's why this beautiful example, analogy over here, like the sun. Sun can never be covered by the clouds. It only seems like it's covered, but sun can never be covered. Sun is always there. So similarly, the ego looking up to the Atma finds that ignorance is enveloping the infinite. The ignorance is not in truth, just as the clouds are never in the sun. Clouds are only covering the sun from where we are looking at, from our vision. So the same way, the finite ignorance is certainly a limited factor compared with the infinite reality. Just like a cloud is small, sun is so big. Since we are away from the sun, we think it's veiled. It's not in the sun, it's only covering it from our vision. The same way, this Atma. To see the sun, we don't need any other light. The same way to experience the self, we don't need any other experience. Because self is awareness, self is consciousness. So to become conscious of the consciousness, we don't need any other separate consciousness. To know knowledge, we do not need any other knowledge. Because knowledge is the very faculty of knowing. Similarly, when the ego rediscovers the self, it becomes the self. So that's why this analogy of the sun is so beautifully given over here by Lord Krishna so that we can understand it. Sun's power in removing the darkness of night is comparable to this, knowing yourself. At night, there beautiful moon, countless stars. They cannot remove the darkness. But the moment the sun rises, the night makes a very hasty exit. It's just gone. We don't even know when it's gone. Sun had to just come. The same way when we realize we are the Atma, we are the self, which is part of the Paramatma, it just happens instantaneously. It doesn't take that long after that. So it's like a similar kind of a effect. Okay? I'm sure you have all seen sun rising and how the darkness rolls away. The same way when you realize that you are the Atma, realization, subjective experience, not just a theoretical knowing. All the darkness, all the ignorance will roll away. Tad buddhya, tad atmanah, tat nishtah, tat prayana, gachanti apunar avritam gyan nirdhut kalmasha. Beautiful verse. Tad buddhya. Over here, tad means that. That means God. Buddhya. That is intellect. So intellect absorbed in God. That's what it means. In other words, intellect which is truly directed towards God. Tad buddhya. Tad atmanaha. Their self being that, tad atmana. And over here, that means mind, intellect, ego. So those whose heart is solely absorbed in God. And over here, heart means collective instrument of mind and intellect and ego. Tad nishtha, established in that. So that means the firm faith in God. Nishtha. Very strong faith. Tat prayana, who strive after God as the supreme goal. Supreme refuge. So with that for their supreme goal. So that's why I said very beautiful words over here. No doubt in our mind when we read this, that whatever goal is, tat buddhya, tat atmana, tat nishtha, tat prayana. So that means the instruments which God has given to us, use it for that ultimate goal. Second line, gachanti, go. Apunar avritam, not again returning. Gyan nirdhut kalmashaha, those whose sins have been dispelled by knowledge. So that light, the knowledge, the darkness has been removed. This is what happens. Intellect absorbed in that, self being that, established in that, with that for their supreme goal, they go where there is no return. So in other words, this coming and going, this cycle is finished for these people. and their sins dispelled by knowledge. This light of knowledge, all the ignorance has been removed. So after doing the deep study, after a person, a seeker, live in unison with this understanding of the divinity within and divinity without. So this kind of individual, very goal is nothing but the self. And this goal is oneness with the infinite, the unlimited. And this non-return mentioned here, because every time we come back here into a form, that means there were some desires, some vasanas, some unfulfilled job to finish it over here. But we forget what we needed to finish. We just create more vasanas. That's why this mesh of vasanas keep on growing and growing. But when a person is awakened, a person who makes this supreme goal, the highest goal, as the ultimate goal for his life, that means a person has awakened. It's almost like an awakened dreamer will not have any fear, will not have any delusion about the dream which he was seeing. Because dreams could be good, dreams could be nightmares. But when you're awakened, you're detached from it. So this is what awakening is. So that's why he's saying very clearly that those whose impurities have been shaken off by knowledge. Impurities are, or the sins are, the ignorance in us. It has been dispelled. So this verse makes very emphatic use of the words when he says that means complete God consciousness. So the sign of true knowledge is that it leads to love for God only. That's why the Nishtha, Prayana, Atmana, Buddhya. Imbued with such love, devotee sees him everywhere. Everywhere. Because God is everywhere. Our lack of love or our love for the lower does not let us see God everywhere. We are putting all our attention towards the non-self. And non-self is what? This body, this mind, these objects. Anything other than the Atma and Paramatma is non-self. And we just constantly pour our energy into that and we ignore the real thing. So he's just shaking that ignorance out of us with these examples also and these very beautiful terms also. So remember, the sins or the impurities are the vasanas, the worldly material vasanas. Okay, very material, and ego is just conjured up by that. So the only antidote for ignorance is knowledge. So that's why Lord Krishna very optimistically, he is declaring, he is giving us the courage also that self-realization is the final experience on this path, supreme. God realization is the last stage of growth. There's nothing beyond it. Nothing beyond. So to be the supreme is the goal. To become one with God is the goal. All those evolutionary struggles we go through for that. And how do these wise people, how do these yogis, when the ignorance has ended, how do we really know them? Or how do we check in ourselves whether this knowledge is taking place or not? Let's look at verse number 18. Vidya Vinay Sampanne Brahmane gavi hastane. Shuni cha ev shwapake cha pandita samdarshina. Vidya is the learning. Vinay is humility. Sampanne, endowed with. So upon one endowed with learning and humility. Vidya Vinay Sampanne. Brahmane, on a Brahman. Gavi, on a cow. Hastane, on an elephant. Shuni, on a dog. Cha means and, ev means even. Shwapake, a dog eater. Okay, somebody who does wrong deeds also. Cha means and, panditaha, learned, sage. Samdarshina, sees with equal vision. Samdarshina. Sages look, Pandit look with an equal eye upon a Brahman endowed with learning and humility. Because Brahman is a learned person, a very humble person also. That's a Brahman by definition. On a cow, on an elephant, and even on a dog eater. So that's how a wise looks at, a Muni looks at, a yogi looks at. Because yogi is identifying everybody from the Atma. Same Atma is everywhere. Dog doesn't have a different Atma. Body is different, sure. Mind is different, intellect is different. But essence of the dog, essence of the cow, essence of a learned person, it's all the same. So a wise cannot but see and recognize the same presence of a divinity everywhere. In all the names and the forms. The distinctions generally are recognized in the form. Like a plant, different plants. Human beings, according to the age, according to the place, we all look different. Our own body has been looking, changing ever so often. Sometimes the old pictures, hard to even imagine that they are ours. So the form keeps on changing, but the knower inside does not change. So the wise person or the Pandit or a yogi looks at the essence. The self-realized sage. That is a Pandit. After his experience of the inner divinity, sees nothing but the same soul everywhere, and to him there's no distinction. Relationship-wise, it will be different. Outside behavior will be different. But understanding that what the essence is, he'll have a equal vision. And that is the hallmark of realization. See, when we perceive things through the perspective of knowledge, what is it called? It's called pragya chaksha. That's in a technical term, which means with the eyes of knowledge. Yes, this sage, this pandit, this yogi is looking at everything through those eyes. The sign of the divine knowledge is that it is accompanied by a sense of humility, not just a shallow bookish knowledge. So this humility is in this person too. Okay? So the same expression of the same dynamic truth he is experiencing everywhere, in himself also, outside him also. Ihi ev te jita sargaha ye sham samye stitam mana nirdosham hi samam brahma tasmat brahmani te stita. In this verse, actually, almost the whole scripture is indicated. That's how deep this verse is. In this very life, here. Ev means even. Te means by them. Jita. Jita means conquer. Sargaha, rebirth, creation. Yesham, of whom. Samya, equanimity. Sthitam, situated, established. Mana, mind. Nirdosham, flawless, spotless. He means indeed samam, equal. Brahma. Tasmat, therefore, Brahmani, in Brahma, in truth. Te means they, sthita, seated or established. So Lord Krishna is saying, even here. That means in this world, everything is overcome by those whose minds rest in equanimity. Brahm is spotless indeed and equal. Therefore, they are established in Brahm. The key term over here is Samya. Samya. That means equal vision towards all living beings as explained in the previous verse. Equality in vision also means to rise above likes and dislikes. That's how we do the sadhana, because we haven't reached there, but lower your likes and dislikes. Stay equanimous in your happiness and misery, pleasure and pain. Because as long as we think we are the body, we cannot attain this equality of vision, samdarshina. What happens, we want to experience, we want to fulfill certain desires. We want to stay away from the aversions. We run after the bodily pleasures and run away from the discomforts. But the saintly people, the wise people, the yogis, they have risen above the bodily consciousness. They absorb their mind in God. They have given up all the worldly attachments. How do they live? They just keep on serving God. That's all they do. In Ramayana, Tulsidas ji said, Sevahi Lakhana Siya Raghu Virahi Jimmy Abhibeki Purush Shri Rai. So that means Lakshman served Lord Ram and Sita just as an ignorant person serves his body. So that means a person who is bodily conscious runs after the body, lot of dislikes and likes, runs after the sensuous pleasures. He says, that's ignorant. And knowledge is what? Seeing God, serving God, seeing Brahma everywhere. So keeping our mind or resting our mind in Brahma. And Brahma is what? Brahma is even and ever perfect. Everywhere Brahma is. So how can there be a like and dislike? Brahma is homogeneous. It's not more Brahma here and less Brahma there. Everything happens in Brahma. And nothing happens to Brahma. Because it's not changeable. But everything is happening in Brahma. That's why they say the truth remains the same. It's changeless. See, just like a riverbed is changeless. Only the water of the river is moving, flowing. Sometimes it could be a dirty, muddy water. Sometimes there could be a boat on it, or people could be swimming, but the bed of the river is the same. And Brahm is the bed of this universe. So if we establish ourselves in that, then there's no change. Equanimity under all conditions. And when we have a direct contact with this divinity, the eternal we become, or we rest in the Brahma. That's what he's talking about. And this has to be our goal. We got to learn how to ascend ourselves to that level. So that's why in the first line, he's saying that jit sarga yesham samya sthitam mana. A person can reach there, but we have to first make this goal as a firm goal in our mind. And then in the second line, he says, Nirdosham hi samam brahm tasmat brahmani testata. We got to make it spotless. We got to make sure our mind rests in evenness. And that's exactly what Rishi Patanjali said right in the beginning of that great scripture. Yogasya vritti nirodha. To learn to restrain the fluctuations of our own mind. That is the real job for us. Because when the ego has ended, the egocentric sansar has also ended for that person. Because Brahma, the self, is homogeneous without blemishes. That's why he says in the next verse, Na prihashyet priyam prapye, na udvijet prapye cha apriyam. Sthir buddhi asamudaha brahmavit brahmani sthita. Another powerful verse. Na prihashyet. Na means not, prihashyet means should rejoice. Priyam, the pleasant. Prapya, having obtained. Na udvijet. Na means not, udvijet means disturbed, troubled. Prapya, having obtained. Cha means and, apriyam, the unpleasant. Sthir buddhi, one with steady intellect. Asamudaha, undiluted. Brahmavit, knower of Brahma. Brahmani, in Brahma. Sthita, established. Resting in Brahma with steady intellect and undiluted, the knower of Brahma neither rejoices on obtaining what is pleasant, nor grieves on obtaining what is unpleasant. So equanimity of the mind. Obtaining really means over here something in the material world. Getting something or losing something. So he's choosing these words and creating a little picture in our own mental mind. He's telling us what kind of a mind a yogi has with a full equanimity, perfection, no change there. So it's like a very vivid picture of a man of perfection. And this person is not an idol. It's not that person is not doing anything, not sitting in the caves or on the banks of Ganga. These kind of a people could be among us. But an ignorant person gets excited or becomes despondent very easily. Because if the likes and dislikes are just, there's a big difference between those. I like this, I don't like it. Of course. Then excitement will be there and despondency will be there too. Because of the happenings in the outer world. And also because of his individual contact with the outer world too. So whenever our mind is contacted with something, there's a disturbance inside. Every day every minute, babies are born. Every minute, people are dying. But our mental contact is not with them. So we don't feel happiness or the sorrow. The minute something happens close to us, we go up and down. But a wise person, a yogi, has transcended the mind. That's what equanimity is. A man of perfection has won over his mind, experiencing the infinite self. So that's why something receiving from this material world, no joy. And if something is taken away, no sorrow either. That's how that mind is. So there's a constant inward attention, constant connection with the ultimate, the divine. That's where this balance is coming from. And this leads to the surrender to the will of God, actually. Will of God. And when the self will get merged in the divine will, Bhagwan ki marji, it's very easy to develop this kind of equanimity. Then you accept both pleasure and pain as His grace. And when a person, it almost looks like a superhuman being, because such kind of a steadfastness we don't ordinarily see. But still, I think it's good to analyze, good to look at it, how this upward movement goes. See, if you look at all these verses, these shlokas have been arranged beautifully over here. There's a sequence. Let me end this class with this sequence to you. A person who is unaffected by the presence of things, good or bad, is the one whose intellect is steady. Otherwise, intellect is the one which really determines it's good, it's not good. So a person who is unaffected by the presence of the things, good or bad, is the one whose intellect is steady. And the one whose intellect is steady is the one whom all delusions have ended. And a steady intellect from which all delusions have dropped becomes the instrument for knowing Brahma. So these delusions these cloudy intellect, we got to fix in order to see the sun, the Atma, who we are. And the one who knows Brahma becomes Brahma. And this kind of a person is living with a full establishment in the Brahmic consciousness of the infinite beatitude. It's almost like a God-man living on this earth. So where did it start? We got to see, is our intellect fully established? Or is it just going up and down with our desires? Does it keep on fluctuating? This is good, this is bad. This is what likes and dislikes are. This is pleasant and unpleasant is. So in order to reach that supreme goal, we got to work on our instrument. And these instruments, sure, intellect is a very subtle instrument. Over here he's talking about intellect, but before the intellect, what is mind? Before the mind, the senses, the body. So that's why it's very important to keep all of this pure. But in these verses, he's mainly talking about the intellect, because he's talking about the knowledge, and knowledge goes into the intellect. And if the intellect is firm and goal is well established in us, then rise on this ladder of evolution. So let's end the class here today, and we'll start with verse number 21 next week. Om Purnamada Purnam Idam Purnat Purnam Udachyate Purnasya Purnam Adaye Purnameva Visheshyate. Om Shanti 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 Om. Thank you very much. Now I would request Urmil to recite these verses, because we have finished first 20 verses of this chapter.